Okay, want to get started this morning and uh, got a couple of things want to go over today. One of them, the main thing we're going to talk about today is about working outdoors during the winter, de-icing, snow removal safety, how to prevent cold weather um, exposure, things along that line. We're going to cover a lot of topics in this, and some of it's going to be on the planning side because you as a supervisor should be thinking about this a little bit ahead of time. I know you've already had some snow in some of the areas in California. As a matter of fact, right here in northern Texas, where I'm at, where we may have some sleet and snow tomorrow. So these things are coming up pretty quickly, and we need to talk about some of the planning side and how you plan uh, to have the right items on hand and to do it the right way. So I've shared my screen here with a document that I sent out, and I want to go over it with you. A lot of this stuff is best practices that has been taught in larger organizations and things, and I want to make sure that we cover most of these items today. One of them talks about, uh, and best practices are always a good idea. Sometimes you look into them and you'll find little caveats for issues that come up in your particular area that may be slightly different from other areas because you have different regulations in your area. And so let's talk about um, using the right mixture when you're talking about preventing ice buildup and things when it starts getting cold outside. Let's talk about for just a minute using the right method for de-icing. Um, uh, Most of the time, you'll see a lot of folks, matter of fact, a lot of your road crews in a lot of areas in our area will use rock salt mixture with sand, and their mixture is about 50-50 on that on the roadways. Their interest is more in traction than it is preventing ice. When things get slick, sometimes you just can't prevent ice. So you see them put a lot more sand in this area. A lot of it has to do uh, with the laws and the regulations and the local requirements in your area. Um, I think when you're icing down your sidewalks and some of the areas around your place of business, or if you're going to be working out at a job site and you're in control of that job site, you're the general. Make sure you're looking at things such as elevated walkways that get icy a little bit quicker. Um, Walking on wood seems to be a problem. Wood tends to cool down and get icy quickly. So dealing with more sand on those areas sometimes is a better choice. The thing is about rock salt and sand is it doesn't blow away. That stuff it's very wind resistant, and it's easy to put down, and it's pretty safe to put down because you generally don't get it in your face. You generally don't sling it. If you get a little bit on your boots, it's not a problem. Um, but you just need to know that that rock salt's effective only down to about 5 degrees. If it's going to drop colder than that, sticking with chloride pellets and calcium chloride pellets and making your own mixture by adding in a little bit of sand is sometimes your best bet. 25% sand is just about right in most situations, but it can blow away if you're using the calcium chloride pellets, these white pellets that you get. Be sure and check your local ordinances about how much of that you can put down and when you can put it down. Also, if you're leasing a building or you're renting in some way, be careful because that can damage the local vegetation there too around the area where you're using it. So you got to be careful about that too. Watch the weather. Let's talk about planning ahead just a little bit. Keith sent me a picture from one of the locations up in California that had snow already, and they were already out having to clean the parking lot and clean the sidewalks and things like that. And my goodness, it came on fairly quickly. And if it catches you off guard, you can be ill prepared for handling that situation. My suggestion is by October 1st of every year, maybe earlier in some higher elevations, you need to set a standing appointment in your calendar somewhere that says we need to look at our winter weather preparedness. And what you're looking for is a couple of things. One is, do we have the salt and sand mixtures? Do we have the calcium chloride pellets on hand? You need to go kind of track those things down and make sure you've got them. You've got them moved into a container. I know a lot of people just use a 5-gallon bucket and put about half full and leave it by the door. That's great. Just be sure that you've got it handy and you have it on hand before the weather gets there. Take a look at your snow shovels. Pull those out, look, make sure they're in good shape. If you get up on a day and you go into work and you've already got 3 or 4 inches of snow or ice already developing, and you pull out your shovel and you remember last year you broke it, that morning, now you've got to jump in your vehicle and you got to go down. You got to try to locate another shovel. That's a miserable situation. So plan ahead, set a standing appointment every year to check that stuff about a month before you normally have snow, and let's get the materials on hand. Also, you need to stop during that time and have a discussion with your employees that do this de-icing and putting down these chemicals and doing these things. Make sure you've got the right PPE on hand to make sure that these employees aren't exposing themselves to chemicals. Make sure the gloves are on hand, make sure the safety glasses are on hand, make sure that you have these things available, and you're not going to expose your employees to chemicals. This is something that, this may be a good idea if you do once a year for some of your staff to go over the SDS sheets for certain things. This is a great time to stop, go over the SDS sheet for the chemical you're putting down, and it accomplishes 2 goals. One is your employees know what they're using, but number 2, they've gone over SDSs once this year. Great. Now you've got your hazardous communication out of the way for the year too. And you end up accomplishing 2 things at once. But that's always a good refresher for those types of things too. Winter weather precautions. Let's talk about dressing appropriately. We're going to get into some very specifics about how to dress appropriately, and depending on how cold it is outside, we'll talk about different layers and different things to do here in a minute. But one of the things that a lot of employees forget to do is to stretch out good before they start this snow removal procedure. And if they're going to have to run a snow shovel, if you're going to have to get out and work and it's cold, stretching is really important everywhere. And you can do some very simple stretches. And I've placed some in this list to show you kind of, and I can get more specific if I need to. I can send you a little brochure that has a few more. This does not require any special location. It doesn't require any special equipment. And in the picture I've got depicted on this document, that's not a pole he's hanging on to. That is a wall, a very sturdy wall that he's hanging on to there, that you can kind of see to kind of help steady yourself and help with the stretches. It's very important to get your shoulders, your back, your hips, your hamstrings, uh, and your legs and your ankles kind of limbered up before you go out and do something like this. If you're a person that exercises all the time and you're doing your stretches, do those same stretches that you do when you get out. Some of the things you may not be doing very often is stretching out your upper part of your body. If you go out and run all the time, you're used to concentrating on your legs. Be sure you get your back and your upper body stretched out good before you start this process of shoveling snow and moving snow. Okay. Very important to stop. This only takes like 5 minutes. Takes no time at all to take 5 minutes and do some stretches. Just get warmed up, get stretched out. Okay. The risks of shoveling snow, of course, is sprains and strains. We've all heard about those. Hypothermia. And I will tell you, we covered working in warm weather back early summer. And a lot of the same symptoms that you see on this list, the confusion, the slurred speech, the loss of coordination, are exactly the same symptoms that you'll see in hypothermia cases as you will for people that have overheated during the summer. So it's the same set of a lot of it's the same type of symptoms. So you need to know that if you're talking to your employees, be sure you keep a communication. Be sure you're discussing with them. Be sure you're talking about different things as you're doing the process of doing snow removal. If it takes more than 15 minutes to do snow removal, depending on how cold it is outside and how windy it is, maybe they need to come in and warm up a little bit. And that's when you need to be talking to them and seeing if they're, they make sure they don't have any slurred speech, make sure they don't have any lost coordination, make sure that they're not having any confusion issues. What's crazy about it is hypothermia cases, it comes on sometimes pretty quickly. And the crazy part about it is it's all of a sudden Joe doesn't seem very, all of a sudden he's just confused about a few things. That's when you need to stop. On frostbite situations, it doesn't take very long to get into a frostbite situation. The most common ones are your fingers, your toes, and your face, especially your face, your end of your nose, your ears, things along that line. We'll talk about that just a little bit more at the very end. I've got a frostbite document that I want you to look at for just a minute.
Hey, guys, can we put our phones on mute if you're not the one giving the presentation, please?
Very good, thank you. So the frostbite situation, we'll talk about that at the end. We'll talk about a little bit of stuff. This chart that I put at the end is something very important. It's at the very end of this document. You need to be discussing this on occasion, especially this time of year. And then, of course, after frostbite, heart complications. People have heart attacks all the time going out and shoveling, and that's because they didn't warm up. Maybe they just ate eating lunch or eating breakfast, kind of a large meal before you go out and start shoveling snow is not a good idea. And there is medical documentation to prove that if you eat large amounts of food or have some food, or you've been smoking in the last few minutes, it's not a good idea to go out and shovel snow. You need to have 20 to 30 minutes break in there before you go and do those activities. That will lessen the chances of having some kind of medical issue. Take a few minutes to stretch, of course, and we talked about this earlier. and try to push the snow instead of lifting it. If at all possible and you can push it all to the side and get away with that, great, do that. Don't think that you have to lift everything you shovel. If you can catch your shovel down to half a shovel or a quarter of a shovel, if it's just sloppy, wet stuff, cut it down to half a shovel or a quarter shovel before you start throwing it. If it's really light and fluffy, go ahead and fill it up and throw it, whatever you feel comfortable in doing. But don't overexert yourself. Pay attention to how you feel while you're shoveling. The issues that I have seen specifically was the guy goes, I was 10 minutes from being done and I just wanted to finish. Somebody looked out there and he's laying in the middle of the parking lot because he tried to push it to the end and overexerted himself and passed out. So I had one of those last December, and it was in an area not too far from Dallas. So you remember on December 30th or so, we had a horrible snowstorm, ice storm stuff went all the way down into South Texas. My goodness, the snow shoveling and snow removal and some of the hypothermia claims that was received by workers actually went pretty high. I was very surprised that we had that many claims during that period of time, but people just pushed themselves too far, too fast. Make sure you're properly trained to operate equipment. If you decide that you've got a large parking lot and you're going to, or a large area, and you've decided, okay, I'm going to use a snow blower, or I'm going to hook up the blade and I'm going to push stuff around, or I've got this new piece of equipment, make sure you've been properly trained before you operate this equipment. This equipment should have been gone over, maintained, prepped for the season back when you did your preseason prep meeting that I was talking about 1 month before the first snow. This should have been, these pieces of equipment should be working, should be lubricated correctly, should be have the right kind of fuel in them, that sort of thing. But don't operate these things if you don't know what you're doing. Had an injury from this last year downstate. A guy jumped in a pickup, went and grabbed a blade, and he ended up tearing up all kinds of equipment and causing a minor injury from it. And it's just something you don't, and you get to talking to him, well, no, we thought he knew how to run it. Well, you didn't go over it well enough with him. Take your time with it. Okay, let's talk about proper shoveling techniques and the right body mechanics in this. After you've stretched, after you've hydrated yourself and you've gone outside and you're out there working, try to use proper body mechanics. The more you use proper body mechanics, the less likely you're going to get injured. And they have these new ergonomic shovels that help out a lot. Not totally necessary, but it keeps you from having to stoop so far over at the shoulders. That's the key. The further you stoop over at your shoulders, the worse this situation gets with strains and sprains. So use the right kind of equipment for it. Lift with your legs as much as you possibly can. Get your feet under you. Be sure you're turning your feet. If you're having to throw your snow to the side, turn your feet. Don't sit there, pull a 20-pound weight load on that shovel, and then twist your body without moving your feet. Twisting while you're holding a load will injure your back. Much more likely to injure your back, much more likely to injure your shoulders, much more likely to injure your knees if you do not pick your feet up and turn. So be careful when you've got a load on that shovel. Once you've got it pushed over into an area, if it gets pretty deep, chop that stuff up and chop it into smaller pieces so that you only get a partial shovel load. Does anybody have any questions about these items that I've talked about so far, especially this proper shoveling techniques? Now's your time to speak up. If you've never seen these two diagrams before, this has been around for a number of years. National Safety Council has these on their website. There's several places around, but they had a guy get out there and show you exactly how not to do it. You see how his back is curved quite a bit between the hips and the shoulder. You see a big arched back. That's the wrong way to do it. You either have the wrong equipment or you have the improper stance. His hips aren't bent. His knees are straighter than they should be. Just not doing it right. On the right-hand part of the screen, keeping the back a lot straighter, bending a little bit more at the hips and bending a little bit more at the knees is important. You notice that ergonomic shovel allows him to stand up just a little bit more and doesn't have to bend over quite as far. The angle on that shovel handle's kind of arched up like that, keeps him from having to bend over near as far. That does help. Let's talk about making adjustments when you're walking. I go over this every year with my staff at my office because ice is a bigger problem around here than snow. Ice is, we'll get an ice storm in here and we'll get a half inch or an inch of solid clear ice on everything. And if you're not careful, slip and falls on the way into the job site is one of the leading injuries between November and February for a lot of employers out in this part of the world. And that's because the employee is caught off guard and you're not discussing this with your employees. This particular little diagram here that I put in the document talks about, you know, when you're walking normally, you're walking with equal pressure on your front and your back leg. And while you're mid stride with one foot in front and one behind, you've got 50% of your weight on each. And that works great when it's dry and when there's no issues with a slip hazard. That works absolutely fine. And most people just naturally do this. But when it gets really slick outside and you're walking around on snow and ice, especially ice, you've got to lean forward a little bit more. And you've got to put your weight closer to that front foot and not center it over your back foot. The back foot, the trailing foot, whichever one that is always the one that almost always slips. Probably about after National Safety Council and OSHA and several other organizations done some looking into this, the foot in the back that is left behind while you're making a step is the one that usually slips. And then once you've slipped there, then it causes the front one to slip and out, and then you go down. So they talk about walking like a penguin, and what that means is centering your weight closer to the front foot, arching your back just a little bit forward so that you're a little hunched over and your weight's a little more centered forward than normal. Okay, this waddle keeps your center of gravity over your front leg. And the other things that you can do is spread your feet out a little bit wider than what you normally do and take smaller steps. Obviously, people sometimes does this just naturally, but sometimes you have to coach them in it. Keep your hands out of your pockets while you're walking. That means you have to wear your gloves. Wear some good warm gloves. Keep your hands out of your pockets. You need your arms for balance. The more you carry when it's really slick outside, the more likely you are to fall because you can't see the walking surface in front of you and you can't use your arms for balance. Wear shoes and boots with good traction. Avoid these. And yes, I'm talking to you folks, me included. Don't wear regular leather sole boots while you're out walking around in this stuff. You would think that you wouldn't have to say this, but A lot of folks, especially your office staff, fail to wear the right footwear on the way in and the way out of your building. When they're entering and they're leaving, they tend to wear whatever looks good, and they're wearing their work shoes in, and they're not changing footwear when they come in the door. That's another part of that planning. You get up that morning, you see that it's slick outside, you put on your good traction footwear, you wear it into the building, and then you change. I can't emphasize that enough, having this discussion with your office staff, especially your office staff. If it was me and I work outside all day and go to work outside all day, I come into work, we go to a meeting, I'm going to be wearing the proper footwear. Not so much for your supervisor that's got to go to a meeting that morning, so he's wearing a little bit different shoes. Not so for your staff that's working the phones, working the dispatch, working these areas. They tend to wear whatever looks good on the way to work. Have that discussion the night before. Discuss this with your folks and have an understanding that it's okay to wear whatever you want to into the building, and then they can change when they get in there if it's appropriate. Walk at a slower pace and take your time. This is not a race. Stay on designated walkways. Hopefully somebody with really good work boots got out there and cleaned everything off while you're on your way into the job site. Your office, wherever it is you're going. Use the handrails when they're there. But I'll tell you, probably 90% of the injuries that I see during the winter is getting in and out of vehicles. And why is that? The vehicle is parked in the parking lot all day. You can't get shoveled. Generally, it's not shoveled out between the vehicles. The snow and the ice is built up between the vehicles and is in the shade all day long. You get ready to go home at the end of the day, and you're stepping on that trying to get in your car, in your vehicle. That's why that's so critical to also have this discussion. If you're carrying items in your hands, try to keep them in only one hand so that your other one's for balance. And then remember, you always put the item in the vehicle first and then use the car for support on your way in. For those folks that have tall vehicles, you're driving your work truck that's got a running board on it or a step rail or permanently mounted steps. The ice buildup overnight can be a hazard. Also, when you're driving long distances, let's say you've driven for the last hour, you get out, that step's going to be icy. And there's nothing you can do to prevent that from occurring except keep a small item in your vehicle that you can reach down there and knock the ice off steps with from the cab. When it gets really, really, really bad outside, you should have something small in your hand walking up to your vehicle, especially when you're doing your pre-trip. You're going to get in there, you're going to start your truck before you leave for the day. Be sure you've got something to knock that bottom step off with and get that ice off there before you try to climb into the cab. The worst injuries that I see from this is falling out of the cab, but you're hanging on to the handles, you're hanging on to the the door, and you start to go down, you catch yourself with your arm and you tear a rotator cuff in your shoulder. That's extremely common. I can't tell you how many times I have seen that occur, and it's all from a lack of planning and getting that ice off that bottom step before you start your way back into a vehicle. Very important to sit and talk about these things and have these discussions. Now let's talk about hypothermia and frostbite. Hypothermia and frostbite can occur at a lot higher temperature than you think. But let's talk about just your basic body and how you dress for the really cold weather. This is something you won't see in a whole lot of places. Matter of fact, you look up OSHA, you look up National Safety Council, they'll just tell you to wear loose fitting clothing. I'm going to get a little bit more specific here because extended work times out in cold weather, there's a way to do this and to stay warm, even when it's windy. The inner layer, if it's extremely cold outside, and I'm talking 0 or below, having that inner layer of wool is really important. Right up against your skin, cotton or wool, something that is warm and up against you is important. For something warmer than that, you're out working in temperatures that never get below 0, that, as a matter of fact, stay between 30 and 40 during the day. Having that synthetic layer, and I'm talking about Under Armour, that stuff you see on TV that a lot of the your athletes wear and that sort of thing. It's a little tighter fitting for the most part, but it's designed to wick that moisture away from the body and pull it to the outside part of the material. So the warmer it is outside, the more important it is to have that synthetic layer in there. The colder it gets, you need to have the cotton and the wool closer to the body. That middle layer, especially the colder it gets, the thicker this layer should be. The synthetic fluffy material, heavy cotton, wool, that sort of things in the middle. Above 30 degrees, 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch is just fine to have in there. You get below 32 degrees or in this area, you get down below freezing, those need to get thicker. You get down to 0 or below 0, these can get 3 or 4 inches thick, and I would be very careful about what material you put in the middle layer, because it's going to get wet on the outside part of it, and it doesn't need to transfer that moisture into your inner layer. A slick, smooth outer wind or rain protection layer on the outside that'll provide some ventilation. We're talking not the this outer layer needs to provide ventilation, so it can't be waterproof most of the time. There are some specialized equipment that you see that do provide good ventilation, but also don't allow for moisture to come from the outside in. Those are only in extreme situations though, but it should allow for easier shedding of precipitation. When you're standing out in it and it's hitting you, you want to make sure it sheds it really well. Now, these 3 items in here is something you need to talk about with your employees. Spend a little bit of time when it starts getting colder outside. Discuss these layers. It's extremely important to be able to have the right layers in the right situation. Other items to consider: wear a hat, hood, keep your whole body warmer, especially your head. A lot of heat escapes through your head. Everybody's heard that. You got to be careful when you're having to wear a hard hat. That hard hat creates a good airspace up in there on purpose to separate your head from that hard hat, from the top of that hard hat. You've got to have a thinner material to put over your head. Readjust your hard hat and put that back on. Make sure anything that I talk about here, make sure you understand that you always have to wear your PPE. Always have to wear your PPE, no matter how cold it is outside. You got to wear your hard hat where hard hat's necessary. You got to wear your eye and your hearing protection. So be sure that if you wear a knit mask to cover your ears and stuff, that you can still use your hearing protection if you need it. I know that OSHA is inspecting work sites oftentimes during the summer. They also go out in winter. You'll see them, especially a Kalosh out in California, will spend some time, and some of the biggest violations, or not the biggest, but the most common violations they see is, well, it was cold today, we couldn't wear a hearing protection, we weren't wearing a hearing protection, or whatever. They come up with an excuse for wearing something to stay warm prevented them from wearing the proper PPE. So keep in mind, you've got to have this discussion before you get out there to the job site, and make sure everybody's has their PPE available and can wear them with whatever they're wearing today. Remember to take short breaks every 20 to 30 minutes to get in and out of the cold, especially when the wind is blowing. And let's talk about some cold and wind down here on this bottom chart. Let's talk about this for just a minute. This came out from NOAA and the National Weather Service. This has been the same chart that's been around for a number of years. As a matter of fact, you'll see a different one. If you look at OSHA and you look at some of them, it looks different as far as the aesthetics and the colors, but I promise you it has the same information in it that this one does. They got it from the same source, by the way. NOAA and the National Weather Service put this out. And so if anybody says, have you ever seen a wind chill chart? So make sure you say that slowly. That you talk about this a little bit with your employees. And this is just to give you some idea of what you're dealing with. You start getting temperatures below 15 degrees and any wind at all, and that wind chill starts dropping below zero very, very quickly. How quickly before frostbite happens on the end of your nose, on your ears? Doesn't take long, 30 minutes in some cases here. You'll notice when it gets to zero and you get any wind at all, 30 minutes, man, that's about all you can handle without getting frostbite. And frostbite's when the skin freezes, it's hard as a rock, and you're probably gonna have damage. It's gonna turn black, it's gonna die off. We're talking some serious injuries. Here, I've seen people lose the tops and tips of their ears. I've seen people lose chunks out of their cheeks, and I've seen people lose the end of their nose from this stuff. And you've got to cover this stuff when it starts getting cold outside. It doesn't take very long, 30 minutes. This is why you see frostbite times 30 minutes on here. This is why you see the recommendation earlier in the document about getting out of it about every 30 minutes and warming up for a minute, get out of the wind. If you're out at a remote location, and I can't emphasize this enough, you're out at a remote location, the building you're working on is open, still open frame, has not been closed in, has not been dried in. Get in your vehicle, go sit in your vehicle for a few minutes. But remember, when you do that, your body's going to stiffen up. You may have to stretch out a little bit before you get back to work. But you take that 10 minutes, warm up a little bit, get out of the wind, take your PPE off while you're inside your vehicle, warm up a little bit, get ready to put it back on and go back outside. You gotta stop, get out of the wind for a while. The wind is where it's really at. And I can't emphasize this enough. If you can keep if you can stay dry, you can pretty much keep from getting frostbite and hypothermia. If your feet get wet, if your hands get wet, or your body gets wet, you're not going to last long outside. Hypothermia, frostbite's going to set in. So how do you stay dry? Part of it's dressing the way I talked about in the layers earlier. The other part is wearing waterproof boots. Most boots are pretty waterproof for the most part. When they start getting old, you wear the toe out and it starts exposing the safety crush resistance in the front of it. In other words, it exposes the steel toe or the composite toe that's in the end. It's no longer waterproof. It's going to leak around the sole. You got a hole in the bottom, it's going to leak. Your foot gets wet. Your hands get wet from a torn glove or from a worn out glove, wrong gloves, whatever. You get wet, you're not going to be able to fight off hypothermia. You're not going to be able to fight off frostbite. It will get you. So be sure that staying dry is the key. And that's why you dress in the 3 layers I talked about earlier. This includes your footwear. Wearing a couple of layers down in your boot sometimes requires getting a bigger boot. If it's going to be really cold outside, you got to be careful with that. If you added insoles in your boots, it keeps you down to 1 layer of socks. This can be a problem if it's not the right kind of sock. Be sure you're purchasing the right kind of sock. Wool is the best if you can tolerate it. Cotton, 100% cotton is the next best. All synthetics, when it gets cold outside for socks, is absolutely the wrong choice. So keep that in mind when you're preparing to go outside and work in the cold weather. So does anybody have any questions on the material that we covered today? Would you like to add anything to it?
I don't have, I do have just a really quick pro tip for the sock thing and also for undergarments. Merino wool is a great product. It's a softer wool, a wool that doesn't irritate the way that heavy wools do. And when I've worked in near Arctic situations and really, really extreme winters, that has been maybe literally a lifesaver because it's very comfortable and it wicks moisture. And it's a natural fiber and it's great stuff. So check that out.
That's an outstanding point. Love that input. Keith, do you have anything to add?
Actually, Jim, I would just like to add, hold on, let me get this. Again, I have seen many people pull up to a site and actually get out, even though it's cold out. And they don't realize that the ground is iced over. Not that there's so much ice on their truck per se, but they get out and they actually do fall, like you mentioned earlier. And next thing you know, they're going to the ER because, yeah, they pulled their arm out, broke their finger, or or screwed up their knee. So it's a very good idea to be cautious when you get to a site. If you know it's 30 degrees, at least be cautious when you get out. I know a lot of people have lifted trucks like myself, and it's kind of hard to say, okay, yeah, no problem. But once you get out, you know, test the ground.
Driving that taller vehicle is always a good point to when you go out to do your pre-trip on those taller vehicles. Take something with you out there to clear off that ice before you get in. Real important. I used to use a sledgehammer handle.
Oh, yeah.
Very cheap, but gets the job done.
So, I mean, I don't have much more to say. Anybody else here in the Dallas office? I do also want to say stretching on a cold day is a good method of not getting hurt, pulling anything, hamstrings, back, muscles, neck, whatever. I've had many guys at sites after sign-in that we start doing stretches. So it seems comical, but it actually works. I know it's not shutting off.
Yeah, you guys as supervisors need to show them how to do that and practice it when you're out at a job site so that they see that it's okay to do. Be sure that you're leading by example. Leading by example is always important. Any other comments?
There is just one that I'd like to add. When I started up in Michigan, when I was just a teenager, I lost a good friend who stepped on what they thought was snow and fell through a hole. They fell through a hole and fell 3 stories. So yeah, it was covered in snow. And so they did not see the hole and they passed away. And that was a hard one to start my construction career, but it is kind of what pointed me in the safety side of it. But yes, with snow, it covers a lot of stuff too. And so, yeah, it was just a bad situation.
Yeah, for some reason on job sites, you see a lot of times construction companies and things use temporary stairs. And temporary stairs are, sometimes they're really good. Sometimes they're not so good. Pay attention to those in cold weather. Temporary stairs, temporary walkways that have been built into a construction site have those unexpected things that could definitely develop. Also, you'll see that there'll be material stretched across certain areas to provide fall protection and with some construction sites, not so much anymore unless you get really high construction, high level construction up a lot higher up in some areas, larger municipalities, you'll see use fall protection. Those get covered up in snow and appear to be a place you can step if you're not careful. Handrails are just missing, things like that can cause problems, but things aren't always as they seem when it gets cold outside. So that's why be sure you have your discussion, a good tailgate safety talk before you go into a construction site when you've got slick conditions, to sit down and talk about some of these things, about your footwear, about staying dry, about staying warm, is something that's always, I think, appropriate to have this discussion on site or just before you leave to go to a site is always a great time to, as a good reminder. Any other comments? Very good. I will leave it at that then, and I will see y'all next month.
All right, Jim, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.